6 broken ribs, 3 of them grinding bone on bone for months. Part of a lung, gone. That is what happened to a sitting United States Senator. And the man who looked at all of that and said out loud on the record that he completely understood it? He is now asking the United States Senate to confirm him as Secretary of Homeland Security, the man who would command ICE, Border Patrol, tens of thousands of armed federal agents. What you are about to see is a senator, in that very confirmation hearing, asking him one simple question: do you regret it? And what comes out of his mouth next is something no nominee for any cabinet position has ever said in that room.
It's the standard practice of this committee for the chairman to ask nominees the following question: do you agree without reservation to comply with any request or summons to appear or testify before any duly constituted committee of Congress if you're confirmed?
I do.
We'll now proceed to 7 minutes of questioning. The record should show, and I think will show, a lack of contrition, no apology, and no regrets for your support. You completely understand the violence that was perpetrated on me. You're unrepentant. The only thing you quibble about is whether I met you somehow when you were in the House. I don't think we ever met when you were in the House. And this idea that the only thing you're upset about is not that you were for violence. What you're upset about is that I called you a liar because you said it to my face, which really more about this machismo that you have. When in Oklahoma the media asked you about the refugee welfare programs, the programs you voted to continue funding, it was this whole idea that you were going to transfer it because you were uncomfortable, your anger, low impulse control, causes you to then go after and decide that you're going to go after me as well. And so you say you completely understood that I was assaulted from behind, had 6 ribs broken and part of my lung removed, and that was just fine. That's something that you, I guess, approve of as far as resolution of political problems. When I talked to you privately on the phone, there was no apology. You just said, well, we can let our political difference, go by. And you said a few minutes ago, we can just set it aside. Well, political differences we can, but when you say that you agree with a felon, a Trump-hating felon who attacked me, somehow you think I'm just going to set that aside? Oh, it's no big deal. I lay in pain for 2 months, had 6 ribs broken, 3 of them separated, grinding upon bone for months, had part of my lung removed, and you think that's great and to be extolled. I mean, the sheer lack of any kind of self-awareness that you're going to be leading thousands of men and women who will have the use of force, and there's been great questions in our country about how that will be used, and you think a violent attack is just fine. So I guess my first question is, do you think that justifying that kind of violence sets a good example for the men and women of ICE and Border Patrol?
Mr. Chairman, first of all, I didn't know the extent of your damage. When the phone call was made, I made it to you and I tried to talk to you. You didn't engage at all. In fact, you said, get your paperwork in. It's got to be 3 days in between.
You offered no apology.
Sir?
And you offer no apology today and no regrets. Haven't heard the word apologize, haven't heard the word regret, haven't heard I misspoke and it was heated and I made a mistake. Haven't heard any of those words.
Sir, actually, it wasn't heated, and I'm not apologizing for pointing out your character.
Good. So you're jolly well fine, and you want the American public and the people up here to vote that may or may not vote for you to know that you supported the felonious, violent attack on me from behind.
I did not say I supported it. I said I understood it. There's a difference.
Oh, so that means you really didn't approve of it, just completely understand it. What do you think most people would interpret completely understand to be? Support for or a condemnation of the violence?
Sir, as I said, we can have our differences. It's not going to keep me from doing my job as Secretary of Homeland Security. I'm going to secure Kentucky and take care of Kentucky as much as I am Oklahoma.
If this were a one-off, it would be one thing. If you just disliked me so much that you approved of violence against me, people could just write it off. Well, maybe they hate each other. But really, there's a pattern of this. Let's go ahead and roll the tape.
We can be good as adults. We can finish it here. Okay, that's fine. Perfect.
You want to do it now?
I'd love to do it right now.
Well, stand your butt up then.
You stand up, bud.
Oh, hold it. Oh, stop it.
Is that your solution?
Oh, no, sit down. Sit down. You know, you're a United States Senator. Sit down.
Acting.
Oh, okay, sit down, please.
All right.
Can I respond?
Hold it.
If he got up too, would you have gone at it right there in the hearing room?
I would have probably jumped over the dais at that point.
You have to be called out on it. If not, this guy continues to get away with this stuff. And it's just, it's silly, it's stupid, but every now and then you get punched in the face.
Well, go back to the 1800s and 1700s, they used to have canes.
And duels. They used to have
And
duels.
duels.
Yeah.
Right. And there's a way that men used to settle their differences. I ignored him 4 times prior to that. And people say, yes, you're supposed to ignore it. Well, I'm not a very good Christian. I try to be a good Christian. And I know people say you're supposed to turn the other cheek. I prefer the David method.
But we need to move from an almost
By the way, I'm not afraid of biting. I will bite.
fighting.
Oh, I'll bite. Yeah. I'm in a fight. I'm going to bite. I'll do anything. I'm not a and I don't care where I bite. It's just bite.
In hindsight, any regrets?
No, I really don't.
So no regrets. In fact, even after your anger had cooled, you were still bragging that if he'd only been brave enough to stand up, you'd have jumped over the dais and taught him a lesson, because that's how men should settle their differences. Do you think fighting as a resolution for political differences is a good example for the men and women of ICE and Border Patrol?
As you can notice over my shoulder here is my good friend Sean O'Brien. Both of us have had conversations. Both of us have shaken hands. And both of us agreed we could have done things different. Sean is someone that has become a close friend. We talk all the time. I've been on his podcast. We've talked through this. That's how you handle your differences. Not like this, Chairman.
I'm glad you guys are friends now and that you've reconciled. But really, it doesn't get to the real point, whether or not you think violence is the way we settle things. In the days after the fight, you said, and I quote, "Sometimes people just need to be punched in the face." Is that still your opinion, that political disputes can sometimes and often only be resolved by violence?
No, I don't always agree with that. I don't believe in political violence. I've made that very clear. But sometimes people do
perpetrated on me.
need, theoretically speaking, sir, I get it. It's about character assassination for you. That's the way this game is played. I understand it. And you are making this about you, which is fine, but that doesn't keep me as Secretary of Homeland Security.
It's character assassination when you were the one lauding the assault. Who do you think started that character assassination? I'm just repeating what you have done in character assassination. I'm repeating your support for the assault. So that's somehow something I started?
No, sir. What I'm saying is you're adding a lot to it.
In the days after the fight, you did many interviews in which you justified the violence as historically justified by precedents, such as caning and dueling. Is it today your opinion that the caning of Charles Sumner was not only justified, but argues still for resolving our political differences with violence?
What I was simply pointing out is some of the rules that still apply to this body. For instance, dueling with 2 consenting adults is still there. I was pointing out what is
It's
still
been illegal for
acceptable.
170 years. There's no precedent for legal dueling. Even then, they fled the country. Do you realize that the man that beat Charles Sumner with a cane, he beat him till he was unconscious? You know why no senators intervened? Because his friend held a gun on the other senators, and he kept beating him until he crushed his skull. That's what you're insinuating is the precedent of the Senate, and that's what you live by. That is a very, very dangerous sentiment. After a half a dozen victory lap interviews where you pointed out that the union guy was just lucky that fear kept him from standing up, Dana Bash asked you if you have any regrets about bringing violence to a Senate committee, and you replied that you have no regrets. Today you've said you have no regrets about being happy, being completely understanding why I was attacked from behind. You had no regrets about, instigating a brawl in a Senate committee hearing. Are those still your opinions?
Mr. Chairman, you're going to have your opinion. I'm going to have mine. As Secretary of Homeland Security, I'm going to bring peace of mind and security to this country, and I'm going to stay laser focused on that.
Let me be direct with you about what you just watched. That was not a routine confirmation hearing. That was a United States Senator asking a man who wants to run the Department of Homeland Security one of the simplest questions you can ask another human being. Do you regret it? And the answer, every single time, was no. I want to make sure you understand why that matters, not just politically, not just symbolically, but structurally, in terms of what it tells us about power, accountability, and what happens when someone who doesn't believe in consequences gets handed the largest law enforcement apparatus in the country. So let's start with the facts. Senator Rand Paul laid out what happened to him in plain terms. 6 broken ribs, 3 of them separated, grinding bone on bone for months. Part of his lungs surgically removed. 2 months of recovery from a physical attack, carried out by a felon who struck him from behind without warning. That is not a political dispute. That is a violent crime committed against a sitting member of the United States Senate. And Markwayne Mullin, the man now seeking confirmation as Secretary of Homeland Security, went on record saying he completely understood it. Not that he condemned it, not that he found it unfortunate. He said he completely understood it. Now, Mullin made a distinction in that hearing that he clearly thought would protect him. He said there is a difference between understanding something and supporting it. And technically, he is right. Those are different words. But think about how that distinction lands in practice. If your colleague is beaten from behind, hospitalized for 2 months, has part of a lung removed, and your public response is that you completely understand why someone did that, what message does that send to the people watching? To the agents who will report to this man? The message is not subtle. Violence against people I disagree with is something I can find reasons for. That is not a neutral position. And here is where this stops being about Rand Paul's ribs and starts being about something much larger. Mullin is not being asked to manage a spreadsheet. He is being asked to lead the Department of Homeland Security, ICE, Border Patrol, the Secret Service, tens of thousands of federal employees, many of them armed, operating in environments where the use of force is a real and constant consideration. The question of character in that room was the most practical question a confirmation hearing can ask. What kind of culture does this person create? Because institutions take their cues from the top. When a leader openly celebrates, or in Mullin's framing, completely understands, physical retaliation against someone who said things they didn't like, that attitude doesn't stay in a television studio. It travels into briefing rooms, into field operations, into the unwritten rules about what behavior will be tolerated and what will be rewarded. And when the person at the top has a documented record of saying that sometimes people just need to be punched in the face, the officers beneath him are getting a signal. That signal is not written in any policy manual, but it is heard. Paul walked through the pattern methodically. The phone call after the attack, no apology. Just a suggestion to let political differences go. The television interviews that followed, Mullin saying the union worker was lucky he didn't stand up because if he had, Mullin would have jumped over the desk, citing caning and dueling as historical context for how men have always settled their differences. And then the confirmation hearing itself, where he refused to retract a single word. I want you to sit with that for a moment. There is a version of this story where someone says, "That was a heated moment. I said things I shouldn't have, and I understand now why that kind of rhetoric is irresponsible." That version would not be disqualifying. People make mistakes in moments of anger. That is human. What is not recognizably accountable is sitting under oath, with a Senate committee watching, and still refusing to offer a single word of regret. Not for the victory lap interviews, not for citing dueling as precedent, not for telling the world that the man who broke your colleague's ribs just needed to stand up so you could do the same. Nothing. That kind of consistency is actually revealing. It tells you this is not a man who made a mistake and hasn't gotten around to fixing it. This is a man who looked at the full record and decided he was right. And that matters enormously when you're asking the Senate to hand you command of a department with authority over people already operating in situations where the line between appropriate force and excessive force is blurry. Paul made the point directly. You are going to be leading thousands of men and women who have the use of force. Think about what we expect from anyone in authority over others. A police chief, a military commander, a school principal. We expect them to model restraint, to demonstrate that disagreement can be resolved without someone getting hurt. We expect that because the people beneath them are watching. And when those people carry weapons, the standard is not lower. It is higher. What happened in that confirmation room was straightforward. Rand Paul forced the record to reflect reality. He made sure that anyone who votes on this nomination does so with full knowledge of what this man said, what he refused to take back, and what it signals about the institution he is asking to lead. Democracy doesn't always protect itself through dramatic moments. Sometimes it protects itself through senators who ask the same question 5 different ways until the answer is undeniable. What you do with that answer, that part is on us. I also want to address something Mullin said that I think got less attention than it deserved. When Paul pressed him on whether violence is an appropriate way to resolve political differences, Mullin eventually said he doesn't believe in political violence. But he declined to walk back a single one of his earlier statements. That is the rhetorical move I want you to recognize when you see it. Stake a position, then build a small technical fence around it that lets you claim you never held it in the first place. It is not a retraction, it is a reclassification, and it does not hold up.